Welcome back to the Lunch Hour Draft Special. I'm Joe Deleone here on the Bleav channel. I also hosted the Ruffino and Joe show, part of Bleav College Football with my co-host Blake Ruffino. And today, we've got another great guest, NFL draft analyst for Athlon Sports, Luke Easterling. Luke, really appreciate you taking the time to hop on. We're going to dig into talking about some prospects, going to get to your latest mock draft that you recently dropped. I want to start this conversation, though, by taking a look at what we think is going to happen at the top of this draft. And your mock draft, you made a shift from your previous one where you have Cam Ward at 1, you get Shedeur Sanders sitting at 2. Do you think that we've gotten to this point with a month to go that it's just pretty much chalk that Shedeur and Cam are going to be 1 and 2?
No, I don't think it's chalk. I think I feel that way about Cam Ward at number 1. I think Shedeur, the closer we get, that's more just conjecture on my part, where it's like, okay, if he would go 3 to the Giants, why would he not go 2 to an equally more quarterback needy team at this point after the Giants signed, Jameson and Russell Wilson? So, for the Browns, to me, the reason Shedeur should go number 2 to the Browns is if any franchise understands the fact that you either have a quarterback and you don't, and nothing matters until you do, it's a team that had Joe Thomas for over a decade and never won anything. An elite Hall of Fame player at a premium position at left tackle, didn't mean a damn thing. They've had Myles Garrett for a long, long time, and they haven't won anything. And so, again, elite Hall of Fame player, premium position, pass rusher, And so if any franchise understands that you can have these, you can draft Abdul Carter, you can draft Travis Hunter, you can draft, the top prospect regardless of position and get in a vacuum, a higher quality talent in the building. But that team knows that nothing matters until you figure out the quarterback position. And so I think the league as a whole, I think the Browns would be high enough on him to where if you're confident that he can even be an above average quarterback, you see what those above average quarterbacks are making, on the open market and when they get extended. And so that overinflation of value will have to translate to the draft in some way. And I think, there's some years like the Kenny Pickett year where the league says, you know what? No, we're not doing this. There's nobody worth that consideration. And I think there's years like this year where it's not, last year we were spoiled with that, with the Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and then that second tier that was still so thick. This isn't like that, but you still got to take the best available quarterback when you can, when he's even close. I think Shedeur's close enough, and I think that's why it makes sense.
Right. I also think part of this, too, is the contract mess that they're in with Deshaun Watson and trying to navigate what that's going to do to their salary cap. They can either try to do that with stopgap free agents for the next couple of years. They haven't really made any moves in free agency at quarterback except for trading for Kenny Pickett to show, who's going to be their starter. It's kind of like with the Titans right now where they brought in Tim Boyle and Brandon Allen. Pretty clear indication that they're going to draft Cam Ward unless Aaron Rodgers becomes a Brown, which probably doesn't seem like that's going to happen, or they trade for Kirk Cousins. Them not bringing somebody in seems to really tell the direction that they're going. The Giants also signing 2 contingency plan quarterbacks, Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, also might be telling us out loud, hey, they don't feel pretty secure where they're sitting at 3, that they need to have not only a single backup, but multiple backup options if they don't get Shedeur.
Yeah, and I think, I said this a couple of weeks ago. I think once a couple of quarterbacks were off the board, there was everybody left, out of those guys. I felt like there was nobody, and it's obviously still the same now. There's nobody that would keep me from taking quarterback high if I wanted one. If I sign Aaron Rodgers, if I sign Russell Wilson, if I sign Jameis Winston or Joe Flacco, even if I trade for Kirk, none of those guys is going to keep me from drafting a Cam Ward or a Shedeur Sanders early, because that's the long-term play. And so none of those guys that are available now, none of the guys that have really been signed in the last week or so would keep me if I'm the Giants, if I'm the Browns, if I like Shedeur Sanders, think he's a franchise quarterback and he's on the board, I'm taking him no matter who I've signed in free agency.
An interesting point that you brought up, comparing this class a little bit to the Kenny Pickett year. And I've done that a lot. I've compared it to that Kenny Pickett year, not for the top 2 guys, but for everybody else, where I feel like that there's going to be a lot of steam in this next month for Jalen Milroe maybe is a first rounder. I saw today a snippet of an article saying that Tyler Shuck maybe gets the first round hype. And then Jackson Dart, I think, has been the king of this, that he's always been brought up and thrown into mock drafts. Certainly think that there's a world where Jackson Dart is on the table, and you had him projected 21st overall to the Steelers. Do you think that this does come to fruition? Because like I just feel like for the Steelers case that like this is just Kenny Pickett all over again. And I totally can see them doing it, but I just don't know if it ultimately gets them where they're trying to get to. And if they did end up doing it, it might end up hurting them.
Yeah, I mean, again, I can see that if the blurb that I wrote for that pick is literally starts with, "Listen, I know this is exactly what this looks like," because they think Pickett went 20th, and it was just like, well, this is the best we can do. But couple things there. There's nothing left for them in free agency. Aaron Rodgers does not move the needle for me whatsoever. Doug Farrar at Athlon Sports wrote a fantastic article earlier this week about diving into the tape on Aaron Rodgers, and it's not just about the locker room stuff and what you're bringing into like the culture of your team. It's really, let's break down the film. Let's see if he's a quarterback who's worthy of all of that other stuff. And I think the answer might be obvious, but Doug really brings it home with some great tape analysis to kind of show you that he's just not the guy he used to be. And so for the Steelers, to me, the reason I will beg Steelers fans not to get into it's like the opposite of the whole scout the player, not the helmet, rule that we've had for years, where it's like scout the player, not the position, in terms of, it feels like we're just pinned into the next best quarterback at 21 and we're doing it just because we're desperate. I mean, there is an element to that, but if you look at the player himself, Jackson Dart is just not Kenny Pickett. He's not at all.
Yeah.
The arm talent is on another level, the anticipation in particular as a thrower. People will, I'm going to keep hyping up Doug Farrar here because he keeps writing great stuff at Athlon, but like he wrote a great piece about how the whole Ole Miss offense is weird and it's not going to translate to the NFL. He kind of debunked that whole myth, and it helped me a lot, like understanding that there's a clearer path for him to develop at the next level. And so those things being the case, because I think there are physical tools there with Dart that were not there with Kenny Pickett, that's what made me feel more comfortable about making that pick. My usual rule in the first round is if you're picking in that range and you take a quarterback that nobody else tried to jump ahead of you for, you should probably be a little bit worried. But if he's there, I think it makes enough sense. And again, I mean, you either have one or you don't. And so if you're going to roll into this season with Aaron Rodgers and Mason Rudolph and you don't think enough of Dart, there's definitely other need. They need defensive line help. It's a rich defensive line draft. They could still, they could use a running back. They could use some different positions, but again, nothing else matters until you have a quarterback. And so if they think Dart, another rule I have is if you're going to take a quarterback in the second round, you should take him in the first round. Like it's too important of a position. And so if you have a 2 on a quarterback, you have to take him in that 20 range if he's there, because if he hits, there's no one else you could possibly pick in the second round or even with that 21st overall pick who's going to make that much of a difference to your team's failure or success. And so that's why I keep landing on Dart there, because it makes too much sense, even though I know Steelers fans are going to see that and just cringe and be like, oh God, not again.
I think the interesting thing about the Steelers and their circumstance is that everybody talks about how the Giants are the most desperate team right now at quarterback. And I would argue that the Steelers might be the most desperate for the fact that their option right now is basically Aaron Rodgers or Mason Rudolph, like you said, who Rudolph's already on the roster and they haven't even signed Aaron Rodgers yet. It just seems like that's the most likely landing spot for him. And then you're in this spot where, Dart has the potential to be a quality starter. I've compared him to Andy Dalton / Derek Carr in terms of the circumstance of like what he could provide. The hope that he starts, at the very least, he ends up being a really good backup. I think that's fine to do at 21, but if they swing and miss again, they are going to be in really deep trouble. And I think times could be over for Mike Tomlin, that this is going to come to an end, that they don't end up coming to fruition. And it's even crazier to realize that they had 2 guys that weren't great in Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, but players that were coveted by franchises that needed a free agent starter, and they let both those guys walk out of the building. To talk about another circumstance here with a team that needs to help their quarterback, the Jacksonville Jaguars. You had one of the most unique picks I've ever seen for the Jaguars at 5. I have I've seen Mason Graham 100 times over, but you projected Tyler Warren to go to the Jaguars. And I love this pick. This caught my attention. I was like, man, this is early for Tyler Warren, but I think that people need to realize that this solves a lot of problems and helps Trevor Lawrence regain his confidence and start to play better again if he has a reliable target and threat like Warren.
Yeah, I fell in love with this idea about a week ago after my last mock, and I was like, it's just like a revelatory. You're like, oh, that makes a ton of sense. I think that's going to be fun. But like, because like in a vacuum, it might seem a little early. But after you get out of those top four guys, assuming the top two quarterbacks go in the top three, and assuming, obviously Carter and Hunter are off the board, once you get to that next tier, I don't think there's a ton of separation between those next 10 or 15 guys. And so you start obviously trying to pin needs. And if you've seen Mason Graham 100 times, 98 of them have been me. Like I've put him there over and over and over and over again. And again, when a fit and a value and a pick makes sense, like I don't like to just change things just for the hell of it either, and just throw things at the wall. And if something makes sense, I try to stick with it because again, you're trying to give the reader and the viewer something that is going to have an explanation, and it doesn't make sense a lot of the time for them to pass on a guy like that. But a couple of reasons why I think it makes a ton of sense. First of all, on the Mason Graham front, deepest interior defensive line class I've seen in a long time. And so while Mason Graham is the best of those guys, if you're telling me I have to spend the 5th overall pick to get him, or the Jaguars who have a pair of thirds, they've obviously got early picks in the 2nd and 3rd round, and I see the defense, the interior guys that are on the board at the top of the 2nd, on the board at the top of the 3rd, and even into the late 3rd round range, I'm much more comfortable not spending that top 5 pick on Mason Graham because I just know the depth and the value that's going to be there at that position in the later rounds. And I look at the fact that, again, with those top 4 guys off the board, top 2 quarterbacks, and the 2 out of the 3 truly elite players in this draft, I put Ashton Genty in that conversation as well. Tyler Warren is the guy that I think you could get a management system, a coaching staff really, really jacked about. And especially with a first-time head coach, who is a creative, innovative play caller in Liam Cohen, who, again, just watched him very closely in Tampa over the last year. You're telling me he wouldn't get super stoked to have that guy in the offense, and they've cleared the way for him. They let Evan Ingram walk, and so now there's that massive void in that offense for that type of guy. And he's very much not Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram was, a wide receiver basically with a much smaller frame, much different player.
Yeah.
I mean, Tyler Warren, I hate comparing guys to the greatest of all time, but in terms of the frame, the well-rounded skill set, the physicality, the athleticism, the versatility, those are the things that made Gronk special. I'm not saying he's the same guy. I'm just saying those, because Gronk wasn't Gronk in his draft either. You know what I mean? He had his flaws and he had his issues. He was a 2nd-round pick for a reason. But you start making those connections and you're like, this is a guy that I think if Liam Cohen turns on the tape and he's like, we're sitting at 5, no one's going to take him ahead of us. Let's plan ahead. Let's make sure Evan, is off the books and he goes somewhere else. We've got this place in the offense free because we know he's going to be there and he's going to be our guy. I just would not be shocked if that's the pick. And again, I kind of love it.
I really love it too, because there's such a small number in this class. It's very defensive heavy. There's not a lot of like premier guys in general. And Tyler Warren is one of this very tiny group of like players I know that are going to be really good pros, that are going to be really reliable skill players on offense. You mentioned Genty's the other clear one. Tyler Warren is the other. And then after that, there's debates to be had of flaws for all the receiver prospects that are discussed in the first round. There's flaws for Colston Loveland, who I think is going to be a good pro, but like not totally refined. So I'm a big fan of this. I think that more people need to start talking about this possibility because Trevor Lawrence's performance and him getting better is either going to be factored around them drafting a offensive lineman here, which maybe it's Armand Membao, or them taking Tyler Warren, who kind of plays to both roles and ends up contributing in both ways. Talking about this running back group, you had Genty going to the Raiders, but it caught my attention. You having the Bears taking Omarion Hampton, who I'm a big fan of. Omarion Hampton, it's my RB2. I'm all for the hype train of him going in the 2nd round. I also love this thought of the Bears taking a running back because they address the interior of their offensive line. They already have a pretty well-rounded receiving room. Their defense could maybe use a little bit more work. But if you're trying to take this ascension to the next level, and if you're trying to take Ben Johnson to help Caleb Williams improve even further, get a playmaking running back that is going to help you take that next step. I'm a big fan of Hampton here with the Bears. What was your overall main logic for this?
Yeah, so it's, in the mock, I had the Raiders trading back a few spots and still getting Genty at 9, which was a huge win for them. They get an extra third, which they traded away for Geno Smith, and they still get Genty because they stay ahead of the Bears, right? So I'm thinking if I'm Ryan Poles and I'm at 10 and there goes Genty, I'm like, man, that's my guy. And, I could sit at 10. There's a ton of edge rushers on the board at 10, right? I could have taken one. Will Campbell's there at 10. If I really wanted, to maybe upgrade long-term over Braxton Jones at left tackle, I could have done that. But the more I looked at it, and obviously, when you're moving down, it takes 2 to tango. I have to have a sensible trade partner, right? I think I found that in Seattle. They've got some extra picks. They need to address the offensive line. So I had them move up to 10 for Campbell. And for the Bears, they don't really need the extra picks because, like you said, they've addressed everything. But I just loved the scenario of them being disappointed that Genty's off the board, finding a deal that they liked to jump back, get another second-round pick that would give them 3. You want to talk about loading up on depth on your roster after what they did in free agency. So with Hampton in particular, I'm not going to lie, I reached out to a good friend of mine, Brian Perez, who has covered the Bears for a long, long time. And I have very specific people in specific, fandoms and that cover these teams where if I'm stuck at a spot on the board, I'll message them and I'll be like, hey, if the board falls this way, who would you like, or who do you think the Bears would go for? And I love getting that perspective because, I grew up a Bucs guy. I'm a Bucs guy. I know those things about the Bucs, but there's so many people that have been embedded with their fan bases for so many years that I really trust their insight and their judgment about the management, about the style of player. And so I reached out to Brian. I was like, hey, here's the guys that are on the board. And I didn't mention Hampton. I did not put him on the list. And I was looking edge, because there were a lot of edge guys. I was looking tackle, maybe Keldon Banks, who was on the board. Some interior guys. And he just texts back. He goes, Hampton with the eyeball emoji. And I was like, do tell. And the more I thought about it, like you said, I do think that gap between Genty and Hampton is probably a lot smaller than a lot of people thought maybe a month ago. And I think when you really dive into his film, he's Ashton Genty light in the way that he is good at everything and does everything at such a high level. And so I just kept running out of reasons not to put him there. I think, when you look at his ability to take that offense to another level, and again, a guy like Ben Johnson, who was in Detroit when they made a very bold move to move up for a guy in Jahmyr Gibbs, and you saw the way he transformed that offense. If any coach is going to understand the value of a truly elite running back, it's Ben Johnson. And so I don't think if he hadn't have gone 18, he would have gone 20 in my mock to Denver, which is where he usually ends up. If he's on the board. And so it just made too much sense to me. And I love, like you said, they filled really their most glaring needs already, and they can really open themselves up to do just about anything. They could have taken an edge guy there. They still ended up with Nick Scorton in the second round, which I think they would love. I think Hampton is the guy. You talked about the Jags with Trevor Lawrence and how making sure he succeeds is the crux of their entire, thought process, their philosophy. It's got to be the same way in Chicago for Caleb Williams. And I think Ashton Genty, or not being on the board, and then to land a guy like Hampton that still balances out your offense, gives you a 3-down guy who can be the featured focal point and take pressure off the passing game. I think that would just be a home run pick. So thanks to Brian for the tip on that one.
Yeah, that's great insight that Brian was able to provide for you there. And I also love the idea for the Bears trading back because they need opportunities just to find more quality starters. They don't need to get premier elite players at every single position. It's a deep class with guys that are going to go on to be just nice players for teams that don't need to be just insane high-level Hall of Famers. They just need quality guys in order for this team to take that next step forward. Moving on for your mock draft, though, the one thing I want to ask is we're like a month away, and I love getting everybody's pulse on what's going to happen come draft day, and things start to heat up more and more. If there was an unexpected move that nobody is anticipating right now that you think could happen, what is it? Mine, for example, the one that I keep possibly thinking about and hearing is maybe Armand Membao being the 4th overall pick for the Patriots. I think that would be unexpected. Everybody assumes that it's Will Campbell. A lot of people also think that, like, hey, if Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter's on the board, they're going to go in that direction, but they need offensive line help. So if there is a crazy move that no one's maybe talking about enough or even at all that you think could happen, what would it be?
I mean, first of all, I love Armand Membou up there. He's OT1 for me. And so it's, when you have a guy, everybody will say this, like, oh, it's just because of the combine. Like, it's not just because of the combine, but when a guy has the film that looks that good, the experience, the polish, the technique, and there's really no hole, and you're like, oh, he's probably a decent athlete. And then he goes to the combine, and he's like, no, I'm a world-class athlete. It does take things to another level, and you're like, okay, you're that guy. I can feel comfortable with that conversation at number 5 because you're just a ridiculous athlete, and it backs up all the tape. I think Donovan Ezeraku had a similar type of like combine performance where it's like, man, everything else is so good. Oh, and now you're this type of athlete? Like, okay, now you're in a different tier now for me. And so I think the unexpected move, I mean, outside of saying Tyler Warren to the Jaguars at 5, which we already covered, I think it's the fact that so many, I don't know if it's unexpected, but I think we could have 6 or 7 edge guys in the first round. I mean, I think the depth in that class. I mean, we're talking, if you consider Jalen Walker an edge, I think
right.
he and Abdul Carter, Michael Williams, that next tier of, Shamar Stewart obviously being the huge wild card in that group. But James Pierce Jr. and Mike Green and Ezeraku and maybe even Scorton sneaks in there. But I think the edge class, and you combine it with the interior D-line class, I mean, they could take up a third of the first round, maybe half. I mean, there's so many, interior guys when you get in there. I wonder how the quarterbacks go. I think that I can't stomach putting Tyler Shuck ahead, in the second round, let alone the first round. But crazier things have happened. I mean, teams, if you fall in love with a guy at any level, it only takes one team. And so I think I'm interested to see who that third quarterback is. Jalen Milroe is the guy that gets me the most excited. I'm not going to lie. I am very much my rule on quarterbacks is if I draft the wrong guy, I'm going to get fired anyway. I'm going to get fired just as quickly for drafting the guy who busts completely as I am drafting a guy who's just boring as hell and didn't move the needle enough, right? Like I'm going to get fired just as quickly for busting on Jalen Milroe if he never becomes more than just a really explosive runner and an inconsistent passer, as much as I am if I take Kenny Pickett, who's just a guy, And so when I look at that next tier of quarterbacks, if I was going to take one, Jackson Dart included, all those guys after the top 2, give me the guy that has the chance to be something special. And I think that's Jalen Milroe. So whether it's a team that misses out in the first round and takes him in the early second, he can't go high enough to shock me, I guess, is what I would say. My unexpected move would be that somebody sees Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels type ability as a runner, which he absolutely has. Yeah. And again, I think arm strength isn't the issue, arm talent in terms of how to harness it and use it in terms of the, anticipation, the accuracy, the decision-making, the consistency there obviously needs to happen and improve. But you're talking about a special athlete with physical traits that you can develop. It wouldn't shock me to see, again, if that's the pick that Pittsburgh makes at 21, like that's crazy to think about. But if you think about the upside and you think about a guy like Mike Tomlin who says, you know what, if I'm going to go down, I'm not going to go down taking Jackson Dart, a guy that even though they're different prospects, I'm not going to go down taking a guy who feels like another Kenny Pickett, even if he's not. Give me Jalen Milroe. Give me the guy who's gonna have the highest ceiling out of these guys, and maybe we'll take that to the moon if we can put the right things around him. That I think would be a really fun pick. That again, if you're going to get fired, might as well get fired swinging for the fences.
Yeah, I think definitely Jalen Milroe is going to be a huge wild card because I've heard a wide spectrum of outcomes of what could happen in this draft. So I love throwing him out there as what could be unexpected. He could go really early. He could fall to the 3rd, 4th round.
Yep.
Who knows what ends up happening with Jalen Milroe. Well, Luke, this was awesome getting to catch up. I'm sure we'll get to chat again soon. Appreciate you tapping in and getting to talk a little bit about the draft. Less than a month away. Where can everybody catch up with all your work as you're going to be putting out a lot of great stuff before that first pick is in?
Yeah, man, this was a blast. You can find me at athlonsports.com. I've got a 3 or 4 round mock draft every Thursday morning. This week's had some trades, like I said, that kind of shook things up. So that was a lot of fun. We've got, obviously, the Athlon Sports NFL Draft Magazine is out. I did a lot of work for that. That was a lot of fun. I grew up reading that magazine, so to be able to be a part of the team that puts it together now is really fun. So if you're like me and you still love physical media and you love to hold that magazine in your hands, definitely you can order it online. You can pick it up at your bookstores, wherever you get your magazines. So definitely grab that. I just launched a podcast last month called Best Podcast Available. It's the Athlon Sports NFL Draft Show. So we've had some great guests on already. Matt Miller, Booger McFarland. I had Teron Davenport on this week from ESPN talking about the Titans. So go subscribe to that. Check that out on obviously Spotify, Apple, YouTube, whatever, wherever you get your podcasts. On Twitter, I'm at Luke Easterling. And so, yeah, come over and talk some football.
Awesome. Great stuff, Luke. Folks, we'll be back next Tuesday at noon for our next live stream. We'll talk to you later. Enjoy your weekend.